My name's Amy Hubbard and I'm hosting today's webinar, From Little Things, Big Things Grow. I acknowledge that I am hosting this webinar from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you join us from today and their connections to land, sea and community. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we begin. If your Zoom webinar freezes, our best advice is to leave and rejoin the conversation. So you can just press the leave button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you have any technical issues, Matt is loitering in the background and he is here to help. So if you just want to send Matt a private message in chat, he can fix most things. To submit a question, we ask you to use the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Just press on that button and you can pop a question in there. The webinar is being recorded and we will be finishing up today at about 12:15. So thanks and welcome to everyone. I would now like to introduce our guest, and our guest is Kellie King, who some of you will know. Kellie is the General Manager of Community and Corporate Services at Wannon Water, where she's been for over 8 years. I did a bit of LinkedIn stalking about your other roles too, Kellie. But the funnest facts about Kellie include, and not just her LinkedIn profile, that Kellie once found herself in London, in a London recording studio, apparently frequented by Kylie Minogue, our one and only, helping a Spanish band record their first album. There's a whole lot in that, Kellie. She spent a lot of her weekends in 2020 crocheting 2 large wool patchwork rugs that are now fought over by her daughters when watching TV during winter. Can relate, definitely can relate to that. And Kellie cut her engagement teeth running youth parliaments and youth roundtables in Victoria, the Northern Territory and the Commonwealth when she was a younger person. So welcome, Kellie. And firstly, a huge congratulations, because it wasn't just one big award at this year's IOP2 award ceremony. It was 2 big awards. So it was the Australasian Organisation of the Year and the International Organisation of the Year. So I wasn't at this year's awards ceremony, but can you describe the feeling when they said Wannon Water?
They said Wannon Water initially for the Australasia one, which we were just so delighted for. We knew we were finalists and we thought it didn't seem to be a huge number of finalists that might be in that category. So we thought we had a reasonable chance, that we were absolutely ecstatic when we received that award. We'd just gone through the process of having our photos taken and ringing a few people, and we were gradually sort of sitting back down at our table when people at our table were like, hey, there's something else. And we looked up and didn't even realise there was a possibility of an international award. And up on stage then I'd already given an acceptance speech, so I was literally speechless for the second one.
And what's been the feeling of Wannon Water since then?
Everyone's just been really excited and really grateful for the recognition. It's really a whole of organisation award. It recognises everyone from our board, our exec, a huge number of our employees that have been involved all the way along as well. So it's a truly a whole of organisation award. So it's lovely to have that recognition for some of the work that you're doing.
So I was doing a little bit of research about previous award winners of the Organisation of the Year. And, you know, over the last few years, we've had DPC in South Australia, we've had Queensland Urban Utilities, we've had Melbourne Water, we've had the LXRA sort of organisation, which is also Victorian-based. Massive organisations, bigger teams, sort of different style of work as well. You're a regional water authority. You're a smaller team. This is such a huge thing that you've been able to accomplish. So have you got any comments on that, or should we just get straight into the presentation?
I think let's just get stuck in.
Okay, let's get stuck in. Can't wait to hear all about it. So Kellie, you know, the words that we've heard a lot in the last few years, if you'd just like to share your screen.
just bear with me and I'll get my presenter view happening. Hang on, let's try again. It worked beautifully in the practice as these things go, right?
All okay.
All right, now stick it on presenter. Here we go.
Yeah. Looks good for me.
Okay, can you see my notes, Amy, or are we right to
No,
go?
we're good to go. Perfect.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. Everyone, I'm really honoured to share this story with you. And I want to acknowledge first, this is my version of the story because there's lots of versions of this story from many others, our colleagues, our customers, our partners in our region and others. And as I said before, the awards that we won are really a product of work by a huge number of people. I also recognise that each of you will likely have some similar stories in your organisations, and there's no one right way to improve engagement practice. This is just my story of how we went about it at Wannon Water. So first I'll talk a little bit about Wannon Water. So Wannon Water traverses the land of many First Nations people, particularly those of the Goodrich-Mara people of the Maar Nation. And for those not familiar with the Maar Nation, it includes the area of the World Heritage listed Budge Bin landscape. So at Budge Bin, people used fire to shape rocks, and they created natural eel refrigerators and eel traps, and that allowed them to successfully farm and trade eels and settle communities. And it's really hard to say how long people have been living there, but the geology tells us that the volcano there at Budge Bin erupted 30 to 40,000 years ago, and the local people have actually got stories of that event occurring. So today I'm in another part of the Maar Nation, and it's in the area of the Peak Barong people, and I'd like to recognise and pay my respects to those First Peoples and recognise their extensive and enduring care for the land and water in this place that I call home. So this is a map of Victoria, and Wannon Water is located in the green in the southwest part of Victoria. So we've got a large geography and a small population. So you can see across the whole region, only 110,000 people. The largest town is Warrnambool, which is about half the population, a bit less than half. And other large towns that you might have heard of include Portland, Hamilton and Camperdown. But as you can see, we service a huge number of little townships as well. So today I'm going to talk to you about our journey to become an engaging organisation through the lens of getting started, embedding and reviewing and improving. So I'll just get stuck in. So the story starts way back in late 2015, early 2016. So we had a new board chair, we had a new MD, we had a new executive team, which included me. And the executive spent some time getting clear on our collective vision. And our vision was about, we were all passionate about people, the people we employ, the people who depend on us in our communities and our customers. And we called this thing Vision 2023, and I pulled it out to show you, so it's on the screen there. And certainly we've updated our organisational vision since then, and it looks a bit more smick and so on. But I think it was interesting to look back on that now. Because I think this organisational cultural context is actually really important. We also had some new external expectations, particularly from our regulator on pricing, the Essential Services Commission. And I think there's a few people from the ESC here today. And around that same time, the ESC introduced its new Primo model with the E standing for engagement. So this essentially called for an uptick in engagement across the industry. State government at the same time was developing its water policy, Water for Victoria, and was requesting help from water businesses to engage the community in feeding into the development of that policy. So the internal and external drivers positioned things really well for us to argue to up the ante on engagement and enrol people on the need. In terms of getting started, we also worked really hard on learning through doing. We just simply got stuck into a round of engagement with groups that people in the business were already going to. So if they already regularly went to some kind of customer group or regional stakeholder group or whoever it was, we just asked managers to carve out some time in the existing agenda for that group. We set up a bit of an approach, a set of sort of focus group questions for them, and we asked them to go and use that time in the agenda to ask questions and engage with the group, and then give the feedback for us to collate. So I think that was really critical in our managers being able to see for themselves the value of engagement. I remember early on I had a conversation with a fairly senior person in our engineering area at the time, and they were saying, but what can we really engage on? Like, people in the community don't know what size of pipe to use, for example. I said, yes, but of course we can ask people about the pressure that people want or how much they want to spend on their bill, and the answer to those questions is going to help inform our pipe design. So having those kinds of conversation was really helpful. We then refreshed our community advisory committee. So we had a committee that was sort of a peak group, but it was a little bit sort of tired. It probably wasn't as representative as it could have been. So we created a new regional advisory forum. And most importantly, we worked with Capire. In fact, I rang up Amy and said, Amy, can you help me with this? Having met Amy before, having done some consulting work for me in a previous role. So we worked with Capire to co-design a community engagement framework and toolkit to operationalise the IOP2 core values and make it really easy for our teams right across our business to work through community engagement for their own projects. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what that looks like. So this is our community engagement framework. So you'll note that we also developed the definition of engagement in the centre, and once again, Capire was really helpful in that, and that definition is really helpful. That having that as a genuine process and that focus on relationships in particular is really useful. But actually doing this piece of work in a co-design way with people right across the business was really, really important. We essentially used the principle of engagement on our staff engagement for cultural change. So we involved and collaborated with them to build this framework, and that supported them to really own it. We then trained everyone that manages projects in the business to use this community engagement framework, and we gave them a toolkit and some supports around that as well. So now we had the community engagement framework, it was time to embed it. So we built the community engagement framework into the wider project management framework for the business. And this was genius for a business of engineers and accountants that love to follow written processes and checklists. The communications engagement team here continued to support people throughout the business. They built their capacity to deliver the small projects, but they jumped in with some more substantial help in delivering engagement on the larger ones. We also had the board start using it. So the board started using it to build and plan their own stakeholder engagement with their board or authorising environments. That had the board learning through doing about how the framework worked, and then they could understand in more depth what we were doing with our wider engagement. We also built it into our strategy and risk environment. So this is our new vision. It's no longer Vision 2023. It's Beyond Water for Strong Communities. So we had it built in at the top level of our organisational strategy, and we also had it built in at the next level as well, which is our community strategy, which provided really, really important context for community engagement in our organisation. We also embedded it into our strategic risk environment. So this risk on the left is one of our 7 strategic risks, unable to anticipate or respond to changing community expectations. And having community engagement clearly articulated there as a key way of mitigating that risk was really important. Finally, we developed annual and 5-yearly engagement cycles, and we ensured that the feedback from those cycles was built into the process to develop and update our annual corporate plan, and also to input to our 5-yearly price submission to the Essential Services Commission. And I'll show you these cycles in a bit more detail. So this one shows you your annual cycle. So we use that community engagement framework every year to agree on what we're going to engage on, and then design the process and deliver the engagement. So we did that each year. And then we packaged up the insights for employees and for board in a timely way, so that they and managers, so that they could consider what initiatives needed to be in our corporate planning process and resourcing to support that. We built those into our annual corporate plan, and then once the corporate plan was landed, we provided feedback to those customers we'd engaged with about what we'd heard overall in the engagement and how they could see that in the corporate plan. This is our 5-year engagement cycle. Now, don't worry about too much in the text of each of those rows. Just know that each of those rows represents a full annual cycle of engagement. So think about it as a funnel. So at the first year, we actually engaged in really broad questions, and then having some more information about what people were interested in, we kind of delved in deeper and more deep each year to understand more about those particular topics, and finished up with a deliberative process in the final year for the price submission. So that's essentially how we undertook our five-yearly cycle. But more recently, we've been working on reviewing and improving. So like many of you, we've tried to harness the strengths that have come out of COVID. So those online engagement environments, we've got a whole additional suite of tools alongside face-to-face now that are much more prevalent in the community. We've also used Social Pinpoint to establish an Engage and Explore website, and we're currently updating our broader website. Also pushing in a little harder around the diversity and vulnerability aspects of engagement as well. So focusing on improving engagement and support for those experiencing short or long-term vulnerability, and also people with different and diverse needs in the community. So that element was also really well supported by things like the National COVID Hardship Principles, and work once again by our regulator, the ESC, their Getting to Fair Work, which outlines their direction in supporting people experiencing vulnerability. And finally, as well, that area around diversity and vulnerability has been supported through relationships with community organisations in our region. We've also recently reviewed the Community Engagement Framework and Toolkit, and our five-yearly cycle at our Regional Engagement Forum. So Amy asked me to reflect a little bit on what 5 takeaways from our experience might be that were important. So here they are. So the first one's around engagement leadership. So organisational culture as a whole is really critical, I think. If you're in a position to influence at that level, do it. Go for integrity, go for transparency, and go for innovation mindsets. And if you can't do that, aim to do that within the patch that you're in. So you might think you need to be focusing on the importance of engagement. If you can focus on the broader cultural piece, that's really important too. Secondly, leverage the expectations of your authorising environment, whether it's your board or the government or the minister, whoever it is, and use it to build your case, like we did in the Getting Started piece and also more recently in reviewing. And finally, don't undervalue the importance of engagement expertise in your executive. I often refer to myself as a generalist, but in reality, I probably am an engagement specialist. And that's probably been a thread throughout my career. So me being at that executive table really helped build the ongoing enrolment and understanding of engagement at that table. The next thing is community focus. So at Wannon Water, and going back to the comments you made at the start, Amy, we are our communities. We all live here. Our customers are our neighbours and our friends, and our personal lives are literally impacted by the way we work in our organisations. We'll hear about it in the supermarket, at barbecues and so on. And the other thing is that our community focus is really built into our wider strategic environment, and it provides a really important context for community engagement. So another important framework we used, other than the IAP2, was the phenomenon of creating shared value, which was an article by Michael Porter and Mark Kramer in the Hubbard Business Review in 2011. It's about the next sort of way, or the current version of corporate social responsibility. So it's really about understanding what's of value to your community, understanding what's of value of your organisation, and being strategic and working in the space where that overlaps. So that kind of broader community context has been really critical in providing a place for community engagement's importance in our business. Next one's around internal capability. So build it into your organisation. Beg your pardon. So internal capabilities, so active learning, get people across the business directly talking to customers, get them in front of people as much as you can. Not only do project managers have to do this at Wannon Water, but we also, when our engagement team goes out for wider engagements, we invite people from out the business to come and help out with that for an hour or two. So about 50% of all of our staff have done this over time, and it's so much more effectively for our employees to hear directly from customers during an engagement than reading it in a report. It's just really, really much more effective. But also you have to back that up with formal training and ongoing enrolment. So someone once told me with change management, you have to keep saying the same thing until you feel like you want to throw up from saying it so much, or, you know, say it to your spew. Not very nice picture, but you need to just keep going with that sort of ongoing enrolment. Strategy, risk and procedure. So build community engagement into your organisation's wider strategies and procedures wherever you can. Build it into risk, build it into existing procedures that people already follow, and have procedures of your own around community engagement that make it really easy for people to own and do it themselves. And finally, distributed resourcing. So we distribute the responsibility for engagement to all of our project managers. We've built our community engagement team size over the years. So we now have 3. We're just on engagement, and we have 8 in total in our comms and engagement team. And this allows us to do much of our engagement in-house for our organisation. But that's really helpful because it deepens the understanding of what we're hearing in the business for people who are in our business rather than contracting it out. But we definitely still need consultants, and we use them. They're really important. So we use consultants when we've got more engagement than we can handle internally. We use them for the strategic thinking and support, like our community engagement framework and training. And also we use consultants when we think engagement is probably best facilitated with someone with greater perceived independence. And those of you being engagement professionals, you'll have an understanding of what I mean there. And just to finish off, so telling the story to you today sounds really very much like there was this idea of becoming an engaging business, and we took step 1, 2, 3, and we got there in this nice, neat, straight line. And I'm telling you, this is absolutely not the case. In reality, it looked a lot more like this diagram, which was originally by Leith Sharp from Howard, and thanks to Kate Dundas, who adapted this, and I saw it at a conference where she was presenting earlier this year. Most of the time along the way, we felt like we didn't know what we were doing. We were trying things. We were 2 steps forwards. We were 1 step backwards. We were circling back. We were losing sight of where we were going. We didn't know where the end point would be. And while the recent awards give us a chance to sort of pause and celebrate how far we've come, we're definitely not at any end. We're still working things out. We've still got a lot of things we can do much better. We're still sort of moving further along in terms of how we can embed things deeply into what we hear into our customer experience environment now. So we're definitely still somewhere along this squiggly line.
Thanks, Kellie. So much has happened in that 8 years. 8 years, more than 8 years since that first kind of gathering of the minds, the brainstorm.
It's been a while, yeah.
All right, well, we've got some questions, and if others have questions to ask, please put them in the Q&A button. If you press the button at the bottom of the screen, you can type your question in there. Now, I've got some questions for you. So I'll start with these, a couple of these, and then we'll move to the participants. So first of all, you know, it's a rural water authority. For me, I suppose I make some assumptions about the types of people that you work with, but they're probably the wrong assumptions. But I imagine there would have been some non-believers, you know, those engagement non-believers, especially at the start of your journey. How did you work with them?
Firstly, I want to challenge this assumption about there's a particular mindset in regional areas, and it's not necessarily the case. Often people in regional areas have to take on really large portfolios and do a lot more with less. So I think particularly if you've mainly worked in a metropolitan environment, you might be quite surprised when you get into some organisations about the breadth and innovation and thinking that goes on. But absolutely there are engagement non-believers, if you like, about for everyone, and that's the same and has been the same at Wannon Water as well. So as I suggested in the presentation, I think really use your external environment to drive that rationale. Really look at that wider environment, you know, use your regulators and use what you're hearing from your customers, think about your risk environment and use that because that kind of brings a more factual basis to why you might want to engage. As I also said, get people doing things firsthand so they can see the direct benefits themselves. Say it to his view, and be strengths-based. So go with the willing. Don't put too much energy into the non-believers. Put a lot of energy into the people who see it and get it, and eventually that leading by example people come along.
That is such good advice. Thanks, Kellie. A question about your community and your stakeholders and the people sort of external to the organisation. How have you seen your relationship change over the past 8 years?
We have seen sort of, if you look at from a metrics perspective and you look at sort of 4 sort of key metrics, you can see a sort of a very gradual and general increase in trend across our metrics across that time, but it is pretty gradual. If we look at it from a regional stakeholder perspective or regional and a sort of authorising environment stakeholder perspective, we can definitely see in studies that we've done every 2.5 years, our stakeholder perception studies, that we have really made significant differences in how those organisations see that we're engaging with our community over that time. So I think that's very clear to us. Members of our regional advisory forum, that peak body, which are people from right across our community, they really champion us as well and can see what we're doing because they get to see some more of the process and detail behind it. I think probably the other thing is that it's been a really important ingredient in driving Wannon Water as an employer of choice. So this is something that we're up to as an organisation as well, because we're passionate about people, including the people that are employed by Wannon Water. But we're hearing it at interviews. When people come to interviews, just about always they will say, "Oh, I've heard Wannon Water is a great place to work. I want to come and work here. Oh, I really love your community focus and your community vision and what you're doing." So people sort of take notice of that. So I think there are a few elements that come to mind thinking about that that relationship with our community across that time.
Thanks, Kellie. I'm going to ask one of the questions that's come through the Q&A tool. So what percentage of corporate funding does Wannon Water allocate to internal and external community engagement activities? Have you got that figure floating in?
I don't have that figure floating in my head. It's not a large amount, I'll tell you that. As I said, we've got an engagement team of eight people, and that's not 8 FTE. And we have an engagement budget that's pretty modest. As I said, we do most of our engagement work internally. We have some budget for consulting, but it's as I say, it's pretty modest, and it certainly wouldn't be a blip in our percentage of our organisational funding.
And just on the consultant piece, there's another question. Could you please say again when and for what did you engage consultants?
Yeah, sure. So when we have more community engagement on our plate that we need to do, then our communications and engagement branch or people in the business can manage themselves. So if we've got a lot on at one time, then we'll get engagement and consultants to assist us. At that point in time, we get consultants to assist us for the more strategic thinking about engagement frameworks and process and definitions around training and training support. But also if there's an issue that might be a bit more controversial in the community, that there might not be a level of trust or perceived trust about the independence of Wannon Water running its own engagement, we'll absolutely look at having engagements at that time as well. Consultants at that time as well. Okay,
and just a note to everyone, if you do have questions, pop them in Q&A. I've got some others here as well. Thanks, Kellie. So what are some of the indicators that quality engagement is now embedded in your culture? So what are the behaviours do you see on a daily, weekly, annual basis?
I think, as I said when I accepted the award at the IEP2 conference, when people started saying to me, "Let's do an agree," I think I knew that we'd embedded it now. So if you just to take a few steps back, that community engagement framework, we have that cycle. The first phase is called agree. And so when I had people from across the organisation identifying that we needed to start off this conversation about what actually we need to do for this engagement, I felt like I realised that was embedded. And people also say, "Let's do a learn," which is a kind of wrapping up the end of the process and understanding how well the engagement has gone and so on. I think there's a couple of examples. There's another one too, a few things that have happened, and I'll just share the story of one. So recently we were working with another organisation in our region, and they were working on something similar and aligned to us, and we're trying to work together with us about how we would work with these same community together. And we could see that probably their engagement maturity wasn't at the same level as us. And so someone who's not directly involved in our communications and engagement team, who was well trained in this community engagement framework, identified that would be a really good way to help show this other organisation why and how we might be able to engage with this community. And that worked really effectively.
I was speaking to another consultant and they were working with you, and they said that they were doing an Agree workshop. And I was like, even though we'd been involved in the development of your framework, an Agree workshop. I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, an Agree workshop, like it's just, the thing that you do at the start of a project. It's like, oh, okay, right, okay. I've never heard an organisation with kind of these sort of proper nouns around and owned throughout the various stages of the engagement. Never heard that before. So yeah, well done there. Another question here is, what advice would you give to other organisations? I know that you had your sort of the 5 take homes, but think if they could do one thing that sort of maybe the low hanging fruit in your organisation is different to others, but what is kind of the one thing?
I think it's about supporting people to learn how engagement works for them experiencing it. So think about how you can support them to be involved directly in that face-to-face engagement with your stakeholders. And I think getting people to see for themselves is really important. We've just recently done kind of a part of our annual engagement cycle, and I was at the Portland Upwelling Festival helping out, and just that the value for me as well of going and actually having those conversations with those few hundred people that came past our stall that day, is just so much more valuable than just sitting there and reading something on the page. So if you can think about how to support people and put some structures into place around them to support them to be involved, that would be the one thing that I would suggest to do.
We've also got a question from the participants. So looking back, is there anything you would do differently?
Oh, probably lots of things. Because you never do things perfectly. There's probably not something specifically to come to mind. Maybe I need to do a learn session for myself and think about that in a bit more detail. There's nothing immediately coming to mind. Sorry.
That's okay. And so I've got a final question here, unless others have got questions and they've posted in Q&A. This will be the final question. What's next for Wannon Water and engagement?
Oh, we've got to go for the Galactic IAPT Award now, I think, don't we? No.
I think so. And if there's not one, we'll create it. We'll lobby to create it.
No, I'm of course, just joking. I think it's the challenge of like maintaining the rage. It's like it's been a long time, and having to like keep thinking about what's that next step and how do you keep deepening and improving. I think keeping that level of energy is challenging and something that we need to keep doing. Because if you don't maintain that rage, then you won't be in that same position for very long. Things take a long time to build, but they can fall over really quickly unless you continue to put energy into them. But we're moving into an environment now where we're focusing on our customer experience environment, and thinking about how we can use the strength of our community engagement process to even more deeply embed those insights back into our business to improve that customer experience. So that's kind of the next focus for our organisation in this area.
Thanks, Kellie. And so there's no more questions there. Any final comments from you? Any final shares for the group here today, or people that might be watching in the future?
Well, just a huge thanks to all of my colleagues here at Wannon Water who've made this all possible, board, exec, and of course our magnificent comms and engagement team, and all the managers and people in the business involved. Thanks very much to you too, Amy, and to Capire. You've been great partners with Wannon Water across this journey, even though you forgot what an Agree is, even though you've helped me do that. Now. But no, I think having that trusted and supportive partner as a consultant across that journey who understands what you're up to and can build relationships with is really important as well. So thank you very much to Capire.
Thanks, Kellie. And I can hand on heart say you've got a very good team at Wannon Water, very passionate people that, it definitely is community first for your organisation. I wanted to say thank you, first of all, to Kellie your team, everyone that's supported you in your journey. Thanks to the participants today. Thanks to Matt for being my tech support. Hopefully you weren't offline dealing with people's issues. We're recording this. It will be made available shortly. So if you wanted to forward the recording on to your colleagues, friends, family as a Christmas present, whatever you like, it will be available for you. My final note is happy and safe festive season. It's a bit chaotic out there already. So stay cool, stay calm, stay safe. And we'll see you next year, everyone. Thanks again, Kellie. See you later.
Thanks, Amy.
Bye.